Well, I did say I would get started as soon as we have somebody. So Verity, you're in luck. Little Miss Sunshine keeps her smile. Just for you, Verity. Okay. I've got a feeling this is going to be quite a misogynistic story, but we'll see. Little Miss Sunshine keeps her smile. So Little Miss Sunshine and Mr. Grumpy couldn't be more different, but can Mr. Grumpy change Little Miss Sunshine's happy mood? Let's see. Probably. Little Miss Sunshine lives in Rise and Shine Cottage on the bank of a river. And Little Miss Sunshine, as her name suggests, is a very happy person. I'm not sure why that suggests that she's happy, but there we go. The sort of person who never gets in a bad mood. The sort of person who is the exact opposite of somebody else who appears in this story. Who do we think the somebody else is? That somebody is Mr. Grumpy. And Mr. Grumpy, as his name suggests, is the grumpiest person in the world. Well, his name doesn't really suggest that, it just suggests that he's grumpy, but there you go. Everything annoys him. Flowers growing in his garden, sunny days and rainy days, but the thing that puts Mr. Grumpy in the worst possible mood is seeing other people happy. I really relate to Mr. Grumpy. One morning, Mr. Grumpy met Little Miss Sunshine. "Good morning, Mr. Grumpy," said Miss Sunshine cheerfully. "There's nothing good about it," snapped Mr. Grumpy. Huffed Mr. Grumpy after Miss Sunshine had left. "That Miss Sunshine is always so abominably happy. Just for once, I'd like to see her in a bad mood." I really relate to Mr. Grumpy. It was on his way home that Mr. Grumpy thought of a plan to upset Little Miss Sunshine. He raced home and made a list of all the things that were guaranteed to upset him. It was a very long list. "Now, there must be something here that will put Miss Sunshine in a bad mood," he said to himself. Mr. Grumpy was not a very nice man. Okay, I relate less to him now. The first thing Mr. Grumpy had written on his list was waiting for buses. So the next day, Mr. Grumpy opened a gate and let all Farmer Field's sheep out into the lane, and the bus was delayed for hours and hours while the sheep were being rounded up. Who takes hours to round up sheep? Mr. Grumpy ran round to the bus stop. "Tee-hee," he chuckled nastily. "I can't wait to see how upset Miss Sunshine is." But Little Miss Sunshine was not upset. In fact, she was not there. It was such a nice day, she had decided to walk into town. "Bother," said Mr. Grumpy. The next day, Mr. Grumpy looked at the second thing on the list. "Losing," he read out loud. So that evening he invited Miss Sunshine round to his house to play cards. And he cheated. But Little Miss Sunshine, being the happy-go-lucky person she is, did not mind losing. There they are playing cards together. Mr. Grumpy won every game they played. "Oh, well played, Mr. Grumpy," she said at the end of the evening. "Drat and bother," said Mr. Grumpy after she'd left. Okay, he's not grumpy, he's mean. Mr. Grumpy read down his list again. "Number 3, he said, getting caught in the rain." Mr. Grumpy filled up his watering can and used his ladder, climbed a tree just outside Miss Sunshine's house. And there he waited until Miss Sunshine came out for her walk. But Little Miss Sunshine saw the ladder. "What a silly place to leave a ladder," she said to herself, and she walked around the other side of the tree and put the ladder away. That serves him right. "Drat, bother and blast," muttered Mr. Grumpy, who ended up stuck up the tree all night. Serves him right. Well, nearly all night. Just before sunrise, he fell asleep and fell out of the tree. The fourth thing on Mr. Grumpy's list was cues. Mr. Grumpy waited until little Miss Sunshine went shopping, and then he rushed ahead of her to the greengrocer's, where he started an argument with Mrs. Pod about the quality of her peas. As he argued, a queue began to grow behind him, and when he glanced back, he saw Miss Sunshine standing at the back of the queue. He smiled to himself and carried on arguing until he felt sure she must be fed up of waiting. But when he turned around, the queue had disappeared, and when he went outside, he found everyone in the queue happily chatting with Miss Sunshine. Double drat, bother and blast! Mr. Grumpy was furious. But then he met Mr. Nosy, and had another thoroughly nasty idea. "Do you know," said Mr. Grumpy, "what little Miss Sunshine calls Miss Bossy behind her back?" "She calls her knobbly knees." Mr. Grumpy's thoroughly nasty idea was to start a rumour that would get little Miss Sunshine into trouble. See, I told you he was nasty. And the rumour spread. Mr. Nosy told little Miss Star, who told Mr. Uppity, who told little Miss Splendid, who told Mr. Muddle, who told little Miss Bossy. And little Miss Sunshine said that Mr. Grumpy calls you knobbly knees, said Mr. Muddle. Did he now, said Miss Bossy grimly, and marched straight round to Mr. Grumpy's house and punched him on the nose. Serves you right, Mr. Grumpy. It was a very sorry-looking Mr. Grumpy that little Miss Sunshine met outside her house the next day. Miss Sunshine invited him in for breakfast to cheer him up and cooked him fried eggs. Sunny side up, of course. Did she manage to cheer up Mr. Grumpy? What do you think? Of course not. No more than Mr. Grumpy can upset little Miss Sunshine. Well, what do you think of that story then? I don't think Mr. Grumpy is grumpy at all. I think he's mean. I think he's nasty. I think he's a bully. And I think he deserved to be punched on the nose. We'll continue reading from the Mr. Men Treasury tomorrow. And at 7 o'clock we will be reading some more Matilda. Thanks for joining. See you again soon.